Did anyone have trouble finding parking this morning as you came into Berkeley? I came down the hill and immediately I was surrounded by young people in dark robes with funny hats. It's graduation Sunday here at Cal and also graduation Sunday in our congregation. And this kind of a day is a very big and personal day. It's a day of some achievement and awareness, I think, by parents of sacrifices that have been made. It's an exciting and beautiful day. About a year ago, Sam, my husband, received an invitation to be the commencement speaker at his undergraduate college, which is Ursinus in Pennsylvania. And so we were able to go and be in the middle of one of the most amazing graduate ceremonies I have ever seen. There were about 400 graduates and about 5,000 people. They shut the town down so that people could gather in a big tent for this amazing event. One of the wonderful things that I saw that you see at graduations is as the students come in, there are people who are just enraptured by seeing their son or daughter march down the aisle. And so there's a lot of clapping, there's a lot of excitement, and if you look closely, there are also some tears. And those tears, I think, are that moment of not only realizing how precious this person is and what an accomplishment has been made, but also a sense of sorrow, of letting go, of moving on. It's a beautiful moment. It's also poignant and quite amazing. I think that a degree in higher education is a time when we acknowledge that it's not only earned, that the person getting the degree, it's not only an earned thing, but there's a community effort surrounding this moment. In many ways, it's an honor to graduate, but I think in our day and age, as we graduate, there also is within it kind of a sense of privilege. This morning, we're talking about modern families. We're in the midst of a wonderful series. And in the midst of that series, we're going to take a look at what graduation means in the midst of modern families. For some, it's not so wonderful. Although our congregation sits in this kind of amazing place, which is right a block away from one of the premier universities in the world, and we mostly experience the upside of success through higher education, today the number of college graduates working minimum wage jobs is nearly 71% higher than it was a decade ago. Almost 300,000 college graduates are working at or below the minimum wage. Some of those college graduates have a master's degree. And even as we celebrate our high school graduates this morning, we need to keep in mind that in the Bay Area this month, 74% of white kids will graduate from high school, while the rate for Asian kids is 87%. And for African American kids in the Bay Area, the percentage is 47. This year in our nation, about 3 million young people will graduate from high school. Helena and Patrick, I guess you're not alone. 3 million young people will graduate from high school. Many of those will go on, about 66% will go on to college and university. But about 550,000 students dropped out of high school before graduation. Some joined our workforce and others are simply out of and looking for work. They join the more than 3.5 million Americans who are working below or at the minimum wage. These statistics tell us a story. There is a change in the way that we live. The possibilities of life after high school or college are no longer as wide open and free as they used to be. The idea that a college education will guarantee a climb up the ladder of success is no longer a slam dunk in our culture. There are many, many disparities in our educational system. It produces for some a sense of hopelessness rather than hopefulness. If you were here and with us last week and watched the amazing movie Fruitvale Station, and I would recommend it to everybody, the story is of the last day in the life of Oscar Grant. If you were here and watched that movie that evening, you would have seen firsthand how unemployment and joblessness is a huge factor in the lives of our Bay Area young men and women, especially people of color. As powerful as education and the promise of a bright future through education is, for some, it means only unemployment and joblessness, and that can produce within a human being a lack of a sense of a future, a lack of a sense of self-worth, and a loss of self-respect. Dr. Seuss's children's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, celebrates those great moments of transition in life with these wonderful words. Congratulations, today's your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. For many of us, those words have worked. For many of us, we've done very well in our life. A time of personal change and transition for many of us is exciting. It has been creative and wonderful. But for more and more modern families, it is challenging, scary, and for some, depressing. The places that some of our young people will go is into minimum wage jobs or joblessness, and for some young men, prison is equally as possible now as attending a college or university. So we turn to Scripture this morning to see if there is a word of hope in the midst of change, challenge, and transition. According to John's Gospel, Jesus gave a sort of baccalaureate speech to his followers. This text that you have heard Patrick read is part of Jesus' farewell sermon to his disciples. He knew that he was going on, and he also knew that they were going on into new places. It's the last night of his life, and he wants to reassure his friends that they will not be left alone in the world to fend for themselves, but that they have a job to perform. They have something they are called to do. We get a sense from this text that they are about as clueless and bewildered as we might have been on the night of separation. Jesus clearly sees in the disciples the future hope of the world for their generation. And he speaks to them not only individually, but with a sense and with a desire for the emerging community that is to come. He sees in them the new workforce that will carry out the work of God into the world. The word and the sentence that I hear most powerfully in his speech is this: I will not leave you orphaned. Did that jump out for you this morning when Patrick read it? I will not leave you orphaned. In many translations, it comes out as, I will not leave you desolate. I will not leave you comfortless. But what stays here for me is, I will not leave you. Jesus says, I will not leave you. So often on our journey through life, we have a feeling that we're going it alone. Probably the number one spiritual issue in our modern culture is the abiding sense of loneliness, that after everything is said and done, we feel this sense, perhaps, of loneliness and isolation. We are in it alone in the midst of change. And I feel that that experience is so, in many ways, ironic, because we are so surrounded in our culture by noise, by other people, by activity and a lot of busyness. But the outcome of all our activity is often a sense of loneliness, aloneness, and even isolation. Loneliness is part of the human condition, a permanent aspect of every human spirit. And indeed, we are reminded that St. Augustine tells us all hearts are lonely, all hearts are restless, Lord, until they rest. Find that resting place in Thee. In moments of despair and great challenge, I know that I am one who always tries to get to God. I always try to find God in these moments of change and transition. I'm searching, I'm looking, I'm reaching. And what's most powerful for me this morning is to remember that God promises presence. I will not leave you. I am already here with you. You don't even have to come to me. I will not leave you. There will be no abandonment when the going gets tough. It's God's job not to leave us orphaned. We are children of God and God's own family, and we need to know that we have not been left out alone in the world to fend for ourselves. So that's a personal word on this morning's text. But there is a public word that goes along with this personal word. John reminds us in this text that the promises and the challenges that were given to the original community are going to continue in us, and that the presence of God is here as we move into the next stages of life. He cautions us not to fall into sentimentality or nostalgia about what has been, but he says, move out into the future as a sign of obedience to the command of God to love one another as I have loved you. This suggests to me a call to the bounty of God's love and care, a call into the bounty of love and care. Jesus' baccalaureate speech presents us with a challenge to move beyond personal celebration into responsibility and ownership of the gospel message for our times. There is a challenge in this text. Change and transition are all around us, are a part of our lives. And change and transition are always a little risky and tricky, and sometimes don't always affect us for what we believe is good. We all do not have the opportunity and open horizons that have been promised to other members of our community. When Christ's followers commit to loving others as deeply as we have been loved and held, it sends us with some strength out into the world. I remember that pious Presbyterian phrase that I hold on to, into a world that needs to know in its despair that God is tender and just. Oh, the places we'll go as Christ's followers. We will go into those things and those places that make a true difference in the lives of others beside our own. Issues of equal access to quality education. Issues of affordable housing, we heard about it this morning. Economic disparity, climate change, and really, prison reform and prison rehabilitation. We will be sent as Christ's change makers into the world, sent forth by a God who has promised never to leave us, never to abandon us, who is with us in all our challenging work. Here's some more words from Dr. Seuss. We'll get mixed up, of course, we already know, and we'll get mixed up with many strange birds as we go. But be sure when we step, to step with care and great tact, remembering that life is a balancing act. For us, the great balancing act is to remember that in times of personal and public change, we are never left alone or orphaned. God will not abandon us. God never pulls God's hand away from us. And we are loved and called into a responsibility that is grounded in our faith, to embrace the future and to embrace the world beyond our world with the help and guidance of God, in whom we have placed all our love and trust. Amen.